In an ancient kingdom where the wind whispers mysterious songs and the earth holds forgotten secrets, a seed waited, unseen, unnoticed, yet full of promise. And from this overlooked seed, a destiny grew that would challenge kings, inspire villages, and change the fate of the land. There once was a boy named Jack, the woodcutter's son, who lived in the village of Sven. It was customary in those days that whenever a child was born in Sven, two gifts would appear on the doorstep of the happy parents' home on the first dawn after their birth. Like all other children in Sven, Jack's first dawning gifts were found on their front doorsteps as expected. Jack's dad went out excitedly on Jack's first dawning, as was the custom for all fathers in Sven, to see what gifts had been bestowed on his beloved firstborn son. To his delight and surprise, his son's gifts were an axe, as well as two beans. Jack's dad was pleased with the axe. It was an axe like no other he had seen. Its handle was made from a beautiful, strong wood, whose genus he could not identify. The head of the axe, likewise, was made of a beautiful, unseen before metal that was so shiny the woodcutter could see his reflection. Jack's father carried the axe with great care into the house, as the edge was so sharp it looked like it could cut one's hand with a mere touch. The axe and the beans were put away for the anniversary of Jack's 12th day of dawning, when he would learn about his gifts and begin accompanying his dad to learn the woodcutter's craft. On Jack's 12th day of dawning, Jack woke up long before his parents. He was too excited to stay asleep. All his life, he had looked forward to this day when he would receive his gifts that would help define his place in his village. After a hearty breakfast of fresh milk, porridge, and eggs, his dad presented him with his day of dawning gifts. They were then put away again, until Jack was strong enough to carry the axe, and his body had caught up with the fact that Jack was now a man. The beautiful axe was the family's pride and joy, but they were unsure of what to make of the two beans. Jack's mom said time would surely tell. By the time Jack was 16, he had learned his father's trade and was beginning to look like he could finally carry his new axe. Jack thought he would begin carrying it on his 17th dawning. He pictured himself walking man to man with his dad with his own man-sized axe. He smiled at the thought. Jack's dad often picked up work in the mines when woodcutting was a bit slow. On one such fateful day, there was a tragic accident in the mines that left his dad paralyzed from his waist down. Jack now had to step up to provide for his family. With his dream of walking man to man with his dad to work in the mornings, with his own axe no longer possible, Jack instinctively knew he would need to start carrying his new axe if he was to cut nearly as much wood as his dad usually did. Jack went to the place where his gifts were kept and picked up his axe. Yes, he was indeed strong enough to use his axe for daily work. He turned the beans over in his hands. They were two dried-up old beans that didn't look like they could provide food to the family. They seemed useless. He had discovered long ago that the other three boys in the land of Sven, who shared his dawn day, had received the same second gift. None of the other boys had paid much attention to the beans when they received their gifts on their 12th dawn day. Their parents didn't recognize the beans, and besides, bean planting was a girl's job. Jack looked over the dried-up beans once more and tossed them out the window and went off with his axe. At the end of the day, Jack had cut twice as much wood as his dad on his best day. Jack's parents were overjoyed. They would not be worse off from Jack's father not being able to go out to work. The axe was indeed special. The family settled into a new normal. Jack went off to work, and his dad took up whittling. After a while, Jack's dad was able to begin selling what he made to the people in their village. On the morning of Jack's 17th dawn day, everything happened as it did every other day. He got up before the family and got ready to leave for his day's work. He went to get his lunch his mom had packed for him for the day, and his morning sandwich she left out for him. He smiled as he noticed his dad had remembered his dawn day and had left him a gift beside his morning sandwich. It was a beautiful hand-carved knife he had made, complete with a leather pouch to carry it in. He ate his morning sandwich, got his new knife, lunch, and axe, and set out. It was still dark out. The dawning had not yet appeared. Yet, as he stepped out into the darkness of the morning, he had a distinct feeling something was different, as if something was there that had not been there before. He looked around the yard in front of him, but he saw nothing amiss, yet he could not shake that feeling. There was no time for a further investigation. He had a long way to go, and he didn't want to be late. Jack's mom was the first to see the change. Jack's parents now both got up at dawn each day. As she went to the kitchen to begin her morning chores, she noticed that the kitchen was uncharacteristically darker than usual. She looked at the window and noticed something that wasn't there before. She rushed over to the window. Outside the kitchen window was a massive plant that looked like a giant bean tree. It was certainly too large to be called a stalk. It was bigger than any tree in Sven. Jack's mom cried out with fright. She went to get her husband to see the frightening sight. The tree was 3 times as big around as the biggest tree the woodcutter had ever laid eyes on. When they went outside to get a closer look, to their dismay, it seemed to go clear up into the sky. They were quite nervous, because it would not be long before others in Sven would notice the giant beanstalk in the sky. They worried what this could mean, and how it came to be so. Suddenly, Jack's mom had a hunch, and wondered if there was a connection to her son's second gift. She went to the place where the gifts had lain all these years, but the beans were gone. Telling her husband this news, they speculated that Jack must have planted the beans. But when? He never told them he had, or even seemed remotely interested in the beans. In fact, they had forgotten about them and thought he had as well. They hoped against hope that people wouldn't notice before Jack got home, and they knew more and could decide what to do. However, this hope was short-lived, as the children started gathering by the late morning, and the mothers started gathering in the mid-afternoon, as word started spreading about where the tree was located. It would only be a matter of time before the menfolk ended their various labors for the day and found their way there. A pandemonium was building outside, as the yard and path beyond continued filling up with the excited villagers, while the king's men tried to maintain order. Jack's parents, not having answers for the many questions that assailed them, had retreated to the sanctuary of their house. Meanwhile, Jack's workday had been cut short, as the king's soldiers had come to fetch him. As they neared Jack's home, it appeared everyone in Sven was gathered there. He didn't have to wonder why, as he had seen the sight for some miles. He, however, hadn't dreamed it would be at his house. When he arrived home and was able to get close enough, with the help of the soldiers, he saw his dad seated with his axe, chopping away at the tree. However, the axe didn't seem to be making even a dent on the trunk. The king had given the order to cut the tree down. It was already disrupting the rhythm of life of the village. Dinners weren't made, and all work had been abandoned. The king also worried that if the tree continued to grow, the sky people, whom no one had ever seen, might begin descending into Sven. One could only imagine what could happen then, if such a catastrophe occurred. Jack reached for his axe to help his dad, and to everyone's amazement, the axe was able to cut through the trunk, and before long, he had cut the tree down. Everyone cheered, because though they were fascinated by the strange sight, they were also secretly terrified. After much speculation about where the tree had come from, Jack's parents did not share their suspicions as they didn't want to get Jack in trouble. The crowd began to disperse. It was now past dinner time, and everyone had suddenly realized they were hungry. The family went inside to talk about the day's happenings. They closed the door, not wanting to look at the evidence of the day's fiasco lying in the yard. However, as Jack turned to close the door, he thought he saw something moving on the top of the cut-off trunk. Worms, he thought. amazed at how quickly they had appeared. Good. Maybe they will eat down the rest of the trunk. Nothing was normal anyway about the massive bean-like tree that was laying in the yard, he thought. If he had gone out to take a closer look, he would have noticed the budding of 3 leaves attached to a new fledgling stalk growing from the center of the trunk. When they were alone, Jack asked his parents how the tree had come to be there since it hadn't been there yesterday. His parents exchanged looks. "We were hoping you could shed some light on that, son," his dad said. Jack frowned with confusion. I don't know what you mean, Father," said Jack. His mom joined in. "The tree was there when we got up this morning, son. We wondered why and how such a tree appeared in our yard. Then I had an idea to check on your dawning day gift, the beans. Jack, they're not there. We wondered if you planted them outside the kitchen window, but that in itself raises so many questions. Mom, I had nothing to do with that monster tree appearing in our yard. And as for those beans, they looked so dried up and useless that I threw them out the..." Jack's eyes grew wide, then his brow wrinkled in a frown as he tried to untangle his confused thoughts. "I threw them out the kitchen window," he finished gravely. "I threw them out there the morning that I started carrying my axe and working on my own as a woodcutter. Could it really be the beans? They looked so wrinkled and old. Why would they wait all these months to suddenly appear as a fully grown tree today? How could it have grown overnight?" "Son," his father said, "we had some of the same questions, only we thought you had actually planted the seeds without us knowing." They sat in silence as each of them thought over the sequence of events. Presently, his mom said, "Son, I think your second gift was magical beans." His dad joined in. "I am inclined to agree. I can see no other plausible explanation." He then looked, brooding again. "The king is going to want a formal explanation. We will need to think about what we will say." That night, Jack's mom prepared a light dinner with Jack's and her husband's help, while they discussed what they would say when summoned to the king's castle. They ate dinner, washed up, and put away the dishes. Jack's mom stayed up a while longer as usual to pack Jack's lunch and set aside his morning sandwich. The household went to bed that night, each person deep in thought. The next morning, Jack followed his usual routine before leaving for his day's work. As he stepped into the yard, he experienced a sense of déjà vu. Remembering the feeling of the previous morning, he turned in the direction of the kitchen window and looked up intently. There was a noticeable section of the night sky that looked darker than the rest. He sighed and walked toward the direction of the tree stump. Sure enough, there was a fully grown bean tree with vines all around it, growing out of the stump. A flood of emotions and thoughts washed over Jack. Should he wake up his parents? Why did it grow back? Should he not go to work? He had to go to his day's work. What should he do? He thought, "I will cut it down lower this time. Hopefully, it only grows by the night's lights." So Jack decided he would work at cutting the tree down and wait for the dawning to see what happened. By then, his parents would be awake, and they could decide together what was best. Jack started working on the tree, but the tree's trunk seemed almost impenetrable. He was also having difficulty hitting the right spot each time with his usual precision. The axe seemed to be bouncing off the bean tree's trunk. Jack gave up and went inside to wait until the day broke. As soon as the day's first light started appearing, Jack went out to begin working on the tree. He noticed it was easier, but not as easy as the previous evening. However, as the dawning fully arrived, it became easier still, though the trunk seemed more hardy than it was the previous day. His mom came outside, drawn by the rhythmic sounds of her son's axe as it hit the tree. "Jack, you're still here? What happened? It grew back," she gasped incredulously. "Yes," Jack said with a sigh. I am going to be late for my day's work. What will we do about this? They went inside to talk it over together. Jack told his parents that he thought that perhaps the tree grew faster and stronger in the nightlight. If the opposite is also true, he said, I could stay and manage the situation during the day by checking on it frequently to see if there is any new growth and quickly cut it down with my axe so that the rest of Zven is none the wiser. His dad said, Why don't you take my axe and go on to work? I will do my work out by the tree today and use your axe to get rid of any new growth that comes up. We'll also put our largest and heaviest pot on top of it. If it falls over, I'll know it is time to cut the tree. His mom chimed in, I will run interference. It's likely that some people will drop by to see the stump and hear more. Your dad and I will work out a signal to let me know when someone is coming along the path, and also a story of why we aren't letting anyone come too close to the stump. Thus they planned, and thus they did. When Jack returned home that evening, however, while they discussed how things went that day over dinner, they reasoned that it was impossible to keep this plan up. The day after tomorrow would be the 8th day of the week. You see, there were 8 days observed in a week in Zven, when all of Zven rested from their weekly labors. It would be impossible to hide that the tree was still growing on the rest day, when all of Zven would be out visiting each other and enjoying the day. Jack's mom said, Okay, so let's think about this from another angle. This came from one of Jack's first dawning day gifts, and the axe that came with it is able to cut it down. Perhaps there is more to this. Yes, that seems very likely, said Jack's dad. But what? Jack, who had been quiet for some time, finally voiced what he had been thinking. Maybe I should climb the tree to see what happens. His parents were very uncomfortable with this idea, but they knew it couldn't be contained for much longer. They had no idea how true this was, because while they tried to keep it down with the big heavy cauldron of a pot, the tree's downward growth had increased and began spreading, creating a big and elaborate root system. They deliberated that perhaps there was a purpose to all this, and that it was Jack's destiny to find out. Finally, Jack's parents agreed. Jack decided to go to bed right away so that he could get up a few hours earlier than usual to climb the tree. He would take his axe, his new knife his dad gave him, and a flask of water. Early the next morning, Jack set off in search of the answer to getting rid of the tree, its origin, and purpose. His parents hugged him as he left, visibly worried but proud of their son's bravery. As Jack walked towards the tree, he felt a gust of wind sweep through the yard, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he heard the wind whisper his name. He froze, his grip tightening around his axe. Was something, or someone, waiting for him up there? Jack gazed up at the tree, where the tree's twisted vines vanished into the darkened sky. His heart raced. Everything within him said, this is a bad idea. Yet he could see no other alternative. This was his destiny. With a deep breath, Jack began his climb into the unknown. The unknown is a place where adventure and challenge live side by side, waiting for those brave enough to explore. In the end, it's not just strength or skill that guides us. It's the choices we make and the courage to step forward, no matter how uncertain the path. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of The Woodcutter's Son. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to hear what happens next.